Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. I'm also curious, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now settle in, get comfortable, let the world slow down. Prague is the kind of place people move to when they want silence. Tucked inside the Nouvelle Aquitaine region of southwestern France, the small commune has just over 2,000 residents. Narrow streets, modest houses, fields and forest stretching beyond the last lamppost. At night, sound carries easily. A car door closing, a dog barking, footsteps on gravel. That is why, when Leslie Hurlbeak and Kevin Trompat disappeared here in the early hours between November 25th and 26th, 2022, the absence of witnesses became one of the most disturbing details of all. Someone should have seen something. Leslie was 22 years old. Kevin was 21. They had only been together for a few weeks, but those close to them said the connection was intense and immediate. They laughed easily together. They shared a love for nature, late nights, and spontaneous plans. Wherever Leslie went, her dog Onyx was usually not far behind. On November 25th, the couple arrived in Prague around 5:30 in the evening. They were planning a short stay, one night with friends, then on to Bordeaux the following day. Nothing complicated, nothing unusual. They had brought only a few belongings, enough clothes for a couple of days, Leslie's makeup bag, painting equipment from her business. Kevin carried a backpack and, unknown to most people at the time, a large amount of cash. Their temporary base was the house of Tom Truelett, a mutual friend who had lent them the place while he attended a party in a nearby town. Tom was not just a friend, he was the person who had introduced Leslie and Kevin weeks earlier. He lived on the same quiet street as another friend, Nicholas Renew. The two houses were separated by barely 10 meters. After dropping off some belongings and leaving Onyx at Tom's house, Leslie and Kevin walked the short distance to Nicholas's place later that evening. They spent several hours there talking, drinking, and passing time the way young people often do when they believe the night is theirs. According to Nicholas, everything seemed normal. Around 2:30 a.m., he suggested they stay the night at his place. It was late, and there was no need to walk back, even if the distance was short. Leslie and Kevin declined. They said they would sleep at Tom's house, just steps away. At approximately 3 a.m., they left Nicholas's home with Onyx. That was the last confirmed sighting of Leslie Hurlbeak and Kevin Trompat alive. They should have reached Tom's house in under a minute. They never did. When morning came and neither Leslie nor Kevin answered their phones, concern began to grow. By midday, families knew something was wrong. This was not a couple who vanished without notice. They had plans. They were in constant contact. Leslie especially was known for checking in often. The families contacted authorities and officially reported them missing. Police began by retracing the couple's final known movements. Both Tom Truelett and Nicholas Renew were interviewed. Nicholas told officers the same story he had already shared with the families. The couple left calmly, no argument, no tension, just another quiet night. Tom claimed he had been at a party all night and had not seen Leslie or Kevin after handing over his house keys earlier that evening. But from the very beginning, something felt off. When police searched Tom's house, they found that most of the couple's belongings were gone. Their bags, their clothes, Onyx's things, everything had vanished. The only item left behind was a jacket, which investigators immediately seized. Both houses were tested using luminol and other forensic chemicals to detect traces of blood. Nothing was found. Neighbors were questioned, no one reported screams, no loud noises, no vehicles speeding away in the night. The street, according to residents, had been silent. At first, some speculated that Leslie and Kevin had left voluntarily, that maybe they had decided to disappear, start over somewhere else. The families rejected that idea immediately. Leslie would never abandon Onyx. Kevin would never disappear without his plans, his projects, his van. Police searched both of the vehicles connected to the couple. Leslie's white Peugeot partner, which she used for her painting business, was found in town. Kevin's Mercedes Sprinter van, which he had been renovating for future work, was also examined. Nothing suspicious was found in either vehicle. As the hours turned into days, investigators shifted focus. If the couple hadn't left willingly, then something happened to them in or around Prahak. Search teams were deployed. Dogs, drones, divers, forest units. Volunteers joined in, combing fields, rivers, and wooded areas. Flyers appeared across nearby towns, social media filled with photos of Leslie holding Onyx, smiling. Nothing surfaced. Then came a detail that changed the entire tone of the investigation. Kevin's stepmother, Corinne Pratt, told police that Kevin was carrying 10,000 euros at the time of his disappearance. She had personally delivered the money to him days earlier. It was meant for the purchase of a vehicle. But Corinne also revealed something more troubling. When she gave Kevin the money, he seemed afraid. He told her that men in a car were following him. That fear followed him to Prahak. The 10,000 euros were never found. Police now had a possible motive: money, fear, and a disappearance that made no sense. Then, about 12 hours after Leslie and Kevin vanished, Leslie's phone briefly emitted a signal. It pinged in a town nearly 14 kilometers away. Officers rushed to the area, knocking on doors, questioning residents. No one had seen them. 3 days later, Kevin's phone pinged as well, this time much farther away, over 80 kilometers from Prahak. Again, police found nothing. By early December, the case had gained national attention. Pressure mounted. On December 7th, authorities made a public appeal on national television, urging anyone with information to come forward. The very next day, the call paid off. An employee at a recycling facility contacted police. He had found personal items in a trash container. Among them was a road safety certificate bearing Kevin's name. Police rushed to the site. Inside the container, they found clothing belonging to both Leslie and Kevin, painting equipment, Leslie's makeup bag, items that should never have been discarded voluntarily. The recycling facility was more than 50 miles from Prahak. The disappearance was no longer just a mystery. It was a crime. And behind the quiet facades of Prahak, attention began to shift toward the people who knew the couple best, especially the man who had lent them the house. By mid-December, the disappearance of Leslie Hurlbeak and Kevin Trompat had stopped being a local concern. It was now a national obsession. Their faces were everywhere: news broadcasts, social media, posters taped to shop windows and lampposts. 2 young lives erased in a village where nothing was supposed to happen. And the longer the silence dragged on, the heavier the questions became. From the start, investigators kept returning to one unavoidable fact. Leslie and Kevin had not vanished in the wilderness. They had disappeared in the heart of Prahak, on a short stretch of road between 2 houses belonging to people they trusted. That meant whoever was responsible didn't need to stalk them from afar. They already had access. Police began reviewing every statement given by those closest to the couple, paying particular attention to timelines, what people said they were doing, where they claimed to be, and whether the facts supported their stories. It didn't take long before Tom Trulett's version of events began to unravel. Tom had told investigators that after lending his house to Leslie and Kevin, he left for a party in a nearby town and stayed there most of the night. According to him, he didn't return to Prague until the following morning. But cell tower records told a different story. Cell tower records placed Tom in Prague during the early hours of November 26th, precisely during the window when Leslie and Kevin vanished. His phone had connected to local towers long before he claimed to have returned. When confronted, Tom struggled to explain the discrepancy. Then came the messages. Police uncovered text exchanges between Tom and Leslie sent at 2:53 a.m., just minutes before the couple disappeared. In those messages, Leslie told Tom she felt extremely unwell after taking a synthetic drug he had given her earlier that night. This detail was explosive. Tom had never mentioned giving Leslie drugs. He had never mentioned communicating with her after supposedly leaving for the party, and he had certainly never mentioned that she was sick. To investigators, this omission was not a mistake. It was a lie. As detectives pressed further, they began examining Tom's past relationship with Leslie. Friends confirmed what Tom had avoided discussing. He and Leslie had been briefly involved before she met Kevin. For Tom, it had meant more than it did for her. Leslie had moved on. Tom had not. When Leslie asked Tom to introduce her to Kevin, something shifted. People close to the group later described Tom as resentful, withdrawn, and increasingly volatile. He remained part of their social circle, but underneath the surface, tension simmered. At the same time, investigators continued to explore the financial angle. The 10,000 euros Kevin had been carrying were still missing. No trace of the cash had been found in any searches. Not in Tom's house, not in Nicholas's, not in the vehicles, not among the discarded belongings at the recycling facility. Someone had taken that money, and someone had made sure it disappeared. As days passed, police expanded their investigation beyond Prague. They traced the route to the recycling facility where the couple's belongings were found. They looked for surveillance footage, toll records, witnesses. Bit by bit, a pattern began to form. The items had not been dumped randomly. They had been deliberately disposed of far from the disappearance site, in a place where they would be destroyed and forgotten. But one thing had gone wrong: Kevin's road safety certificate. That single document had survived long enough to expose everything. Meanwhile, the families were living in a waking nightmare. Christmas came and went without Leslie or Kevin. No messages, no calls, no explanation. For the first time in years, both families gathered around empty spaces where their children should have been. Hope was fading, but it hadn't died. Then, in early January, something devastating happened. On January 2nd, a dog's body was discovered not far from Prague. The animal was badly decomposed, but its size and coloring matched onyx. Due to the condition of the remains, authorities could not confirm the dog's identity through DNA, but for Leslie's family, the implication was unbearable. Leslie would never abandon Onyx. If that dog was hers, then Leslie and Kevin were almost certainly gone too. Public searches intensified. Kevin's stepmother, Corinne Pratt, organized volunteer operations through social media, bringing together dozens, sometimes hundreds of people. Fields were walked, woods were combed, ditches were searched. Nothing. Another search, organized by Kevin's father, Guy Pratt, descended into chaos. Volunteers lacked coordination, areas were duplicated, others were missed entirely, and still there were no answers. Behind the scenes, police were preparing to act. They had enough inconsistencies, enough contradictions, and enough digital evidence to justify arrests. They began quietly monitoring Tom Trulett's movements, his communications, his associations. They learned that Tom was not alone. He had close ties to several young men in the region, men who shared his habits, his social circle, his access to vehicles. One name appeared again and again: Nathan Badgie. Nathan lived less than a quarter mile from where Leslie and Kevin's belongings were found discarded. His connection to Tom was well known. Their communication in the days after the disappearance was frequent. Another name followed: Enzo Chalatet. Then two more: Stephen Matthew, Michael Elzadi. 5 men, 1 circle, 1 night. On February 28, 2023, police made their move. Tom Truitt was arrested at his father's home. The next day, Nathan Badgie was arrested on an island in the Charente Maritime region. On March 2nd, Enzo Chalatet was taken into custody. Each arrest tightened the noose. Interrogations began immediately, separately, intensely, for hours at a time. Investigators compared stories, watched for cracks, applied pressure, and slowly those cracks turned into fractures. Details began to emerge that no outsider could have known: locations, times, methods. Then, on March 3rd, police received information that led them to a field near the town of Puy-Revolt. What they found there confirmed everyone's worst fear. A body was buried beneath the soil. It was Kevin Trompat. The following day, another body was discovered in a forest near Verrines, just a few miles away. It was Leslie Hurlbeak. Both had been missing for over 3 months. The silence was finally broken. But what investigators uncovered next would reveal just how brutal, calculated, and personal the crime had truly been. When the bodies of Kevin Trompat and Leslie Hurlbeck were finally uncovered in early March 2023, the case crossed an invisible line. What had once been a disappearance filled with fragile hope became something darker, heavier, and irreversible. The autopsies left no room for doubt. Both Kevin and Leslie had been subjected to extreme violence. Their bodies bore multiple fractures, deep cuts, and blunt force injuries. The medical examiner concluded that the wounds were consistent with attacks using iron bars, hammers, and large bladed weapons. The cause of death for both was massive internal and external bleeding. This was not an accident. This was not impulsive violence. It was a sustained, deliberate killing. As investigators confronted the suspects with the forensic findings, the final barrier of silence collapsed. The 5 men began to speak. Not all at once, not in agreement, but enough pieces emerged to reconstruct what happened in the early hours of November 26th. After leaving Nicholas Renew's house around 3 a.m., Leslie, Kevin, and Onyx walked back toward Tom Truitt's home. When they arrived, the house was dark and empty. Tom was supposed to be at a party miles away. Leslie felt increasingly unwell. The synthetic drug Tom had given her earlier was taking its toll. She messaged him, saying she felt sick and needed help. Tom came. This alone shattered his original story. According to investigators, Tom arrived at his house shortly after receiving Leslie's message. For the next 30 minutes, Leslie, Kevin, and Tom sat together inside the house. They drank beer. Drugs were used. Nothing outwardly violent happened during that time, but something else was already in motion. Outside, parked near the house, a van waited. Inside that van were Nathan Badgie, Enzo Chalatet, Stephen Matthew, and Mikhail Elvadi. All 4 had arrived together. All 4 were armed. Hammers, iron bars, knives. One of them carried a sword. This was not spontaneous. This was planned. At some point, Tom sent a message. That message was the signal. The men entered the house quickly and without warning. Leslie and Kevin had no time to react. Kevin was struck repeatedly with a hammer. Leslie was restrained. Onyx panicked, barking and moving frantically. The attack was brutal and overwhelming. Kevin was beaten into submission. Leslie was overpowered by Tom himself. The violence was fast, chaotic, and relentless. Once the couple was subdued, they were forced into the van along with Onyx. Their personal belongings were gathered and taken as well. The house was left behind. The quiet street returned to silence. The van drove away from Prahak. What happened next unfolded far from the village. According to testimony, the group drove to an isolated area. There, Kevin was assaulted again. This time, the beating was fatal. The suspects disagreed on who delivered the final blows, but the result was the same. Kevin died there. Leslie was killed shortly after. Some suspects claimed Tom used a sword, others described knives. What was consistent was the outcome. She never survived the night. The fate of Onyx was never officially confirmed, but investigators believe the dog was killed as well. The suspects claimed they abandoned him by the roadside, but authorities rejected that version. Given the media attention and the widespread sharing of Onyx's image, someone would have found him. The decomposed dog discovered in early January was almost certainly him. With all three dead, the group focused on concealment. Kevin's body was buried in a field near Puravault. Leslie's body was buried separately in a forest near Varines. Whether the bodies were moved immediately or hidden temporarily before burial remains disputed, but investigators believe the suspects returned days later to relocate them. Afterward, the men returned to Prahak. Tom stayed behind to clean his house. Any trace of blood, any sign of violence, anything that could link the location to the crime. The others split tasks. The van was cleaned. The victim's belongings were transported and dumped in a recycling container over 50 miles away. The goal was simple: erase everything. As investigators pieced together the motive, it became clear that no single reason explained the crime. There was jealousy. Tom had never accepted Leslie's rejection. Watching her fall in love with Kevin only deepened his resentment. There was money. Kevin had 10,000 euros on him that night. Tom claimed Kevin owed him tens of thousands more, alleging drug-related debts. Kevin's family fiercely denied this, insisting the accusation was a lie designed to smear the victim and justify the violence. There was also influence. Group dynamics, loyalty, shared culpability. Once the plan was in motion, backing out was no longer an option. When the arrests were made public, shock rippled through France. The brutality of the crime stunned even seasoned investigators. 5 young men, all known to the victims, had worked together to kidnap and murder a couple who trusted them. Funerals followed. Kevin was laid to rest on March 16th, Leslie on March 18th. Both services were marked by grief, anger, and disbelief. Families who had clung to hope were now left with only memories and unanswered questions. Kevin's father, Guy Trompat, was released from prison around the same time. Overwhelmed by loss, he organized a memorial march that drew hundreds, but grief consumed him. He lost weight rapidly. He relied on medication. His life unraveled. In May 2023, Guy was arrested for allegedly plotting to have the suspects killed while in prison. He was accused of offering money to eliminate them. Though initially convicted, his sentence was later overturned, and he remains free. The ripple effects continued. Kevin's elderly relative, Marie de Rees Garcia, was arrested after posting violent threats online. Her past, linked to crimes decades earlier, resurfaced, adding another disturbing layer to an already tragic case. In April 2023, 2 additional suspects were formally charged, bringing the total to 5 men accused of kidnapping, murder, and concealment of bodies. Then, in March 2025, a procedural error led to the temporary release of Nathan Badgie. A legal notification had been sent incorrectly. Though still awaiting trial and under strict restrictions, his release outraged the victims' families. As of now, Tom Truitt, Enzo Chalate, Stephen Matthew, and Mikhail Elzadi remain in custody. Under French law, they face life imprisonment with the possibility of parole only after decades. For Prahak, the quiet village where nothing was supposed to happen, the scars remain. A street where a short walk turned fatal, a house that became a trap, a night that exposed how betrayal can hide behind familiarity, and a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are not strangers at all. Beaumont was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's birthdays, and the local baker knew your usual order. Tree-lined streets, weekend markets, and neighbors who waved at each passing car made it feel safe, almost idyllic. But safety, as it often does, can be deceptive. Beneath the surface, for years, a darkness had been moving unnoticed, leaving a trail of lives ended too soon, all misclassified as accidents or natural causes. The first known victim was Clarissa Tate, a 27-year-old teacher, discovered at the bottom of her apartment staircase on a rainy January morning. Police concluded it was an accident, alcohol, slippery stairs, but the coroner's report noted a faint bruise on her neck. It was dismissed. No one thought twice. That bruise, subtle as it was, would later become a chilling clue. Over the next 2 years, Beaumont recorded more tragedies. A man drowned in his bathtub, an elderly woman struck on the head while gardening, a delivery driver killed in what seemed a traffic accident. Each case was reviewed, each death deemed isolated and explained away. Families mourned, the town whispered condolences, and the killer remained invisible, hidden in plain sight. Detective Marianne Lavoisier was a meticulous investigator. When superiors noticed a small but unusual increase in unexplained deaths, she was assigned to dig deeper. Reviewing files, she noticed subtle patterns. Victims, while unrelated, shared fleeting interactions with strangers shortly before their deaths. A man offering help on the street, a brief phone call, a neighbor seen speaking briefly to someone unknown. Minor details overlooked by previous investigators, but they were threads Marianne could follow. Small-town life worked in the killer's favor. People trusted each other, and this trust masked vulnerability. The perpetrator exploited the ordinary, the quiet moments, the routine paths, the predictable habits of those around him. Each death was engineered to appear natural, accidental, or unfortunate. This careful misdirection allowed him to continue unnoticed for years. Marianne began re-examining forensic reports. Bruises that didn't match reported accidents, traces of chemicals in bloodstreams previously dismissed, puncture marks that went unnoticed. Each piece suggested intentional harm. Modern forensic techniques exposed what older examinations had missed. It was a puzzle coming together slowly but clearly. Someone had been deliberately taking lives while ensuring they looked accidental. The victims had no apparent connection. They did not work together, socialize together, or share debts or enemies. The killer didn't seek revenge or profit. He was a predator who selected victims based on opportunity, vulnerability, and the likelihood that their deaths would go unnoticed or misclassified. By late 2018, Marianne had developed a profile, a highly methodical individual, likely local, familiar with town routines, socially competent enough to blend in and appear unremarkable. He waited, studied, and executed with calculated precision. Then came Julian Krieger, a 23-year-old software developer who vanished in the early hours of a November morning. Julian's disappearance was too recent to misclassify. Unlike previous victims, his apartment showed signs of a struggle. personal belongings were displaced and his laptop revealed encrypted messages from an unknown sender. Forensic tests revealed chemical traces on his doorknob, traces that matched residues found on earlier victims. This mistake, however minor, opened the investigation wide. It became frighteningly clear the killer's previous success had relied on misclassification and public assumption. One small error had finally provided Marianne with the evidence she needed to connect cases spanning almost a decade. Marianne examined the lives of the victims. Clarissa, Evelyn Park, Julian, and others each had been observed by someone without realizing it. The killer studied his targets, knew their routines, and attacked when it was safe to do so. Sometimes the attack was subtle, a chemical administered, a push, a precise blow. Other times he made it look like an accident, a slip, a fall, a sudden heart attack. The pattern of randomness was deliberate. Randomness misleads, and misclassification protected him. Small inconsistencies in earlier investigations now took on significance. The bruises, the punctures, the traces of chemical toxins, they were all warnings, ignored until Marianne began to see the broader pattern. Surveillance footage, though often grainy, showed fleeting glimpses of a lone figure near several crime scenes. The man moved deliberately, carefully, almost rehearsed. In a town like Beaumont, he was invisible. The ordinary masked the extraordinary. Each victim had been alone, isolated in a way that made intervention impossible. The killer understood human behavior. He relied on the assumption that small injuries or faint bruises would go unnoticed, that deaths would be assumed accidental. He was patient. For years he had refined his methods, improving with each misclassified death, learning from what investigators did and did not notice. By mid-2019, Marianne's investigation had uncovered over a dozen linked deaths. She and her team combed through old reports, medical records, and interviews. Families who had accepted the accidental explanations were now horrified to learn their loved ones had been targeted. The realization shook Beaumont to its core. The ghost of Beaumont, as the media would soon call him, had moved unseen for years, leaving only misclassified deaths as evidence. For Marianne, the breakthrough wasn't just forensic, it was psychological. She studied the behaviors of the victims, the subtle interactions with strangers before their deaths, and discovered a chilling pattern. The killer selected people who would be least likely to trigger suspicion. He observed their habits, their routines, their vulnerabilities. By understanding the ordinary, he concealed the extraordinary. The discovery of Julian Krieger's partial digital trail, the messages, the chemical residues, the disrupted apartment, provided a template for understanding previous cases. All the victims, it seemed, had been observed, manipulated, and then eliminated with precision. The scale of the killer's patience, cunning, and disregard for life became painfully evident. Beaumont had harbored a predator for nearly a decade, a killer who relied on misclassification, public trust, and human error. And yet, despite the horror, there was hope. One misstep, one survivor, one overlooked chemical residue had finally begun to expose him. Marianne and her team were now on the path to reveal a predator long hidden, the first steps towards justice for the families of those whose deaths were once dismissed as accidents. As Marianne delved deeper into the ghost of Beaumont's pattern, the town itself began to feel different, haunted, almost aware of the predator that had thrived among them for years. Residents who once felt safe now questioned every shadow, every unfamiliar face. Parents walked their children to school instead of allowing them to take the shortcuts through the park. Shopkeepers remembered the strangers who lingered in their stores too long. Beaumont had always been ordinary, predictable, but that predictability had been the killer's ally. Marianne started to create a comprehensive timeline of the deaths and disappearances. Each victim's last known movements, the people they interacted with, even the weather conditions were plotted on a map. Patterns emerged. The killer chose isolated locations, times when witnesses were few, and moments when minor mishaps could plausibly explain injuries. He struck when he could be certain the deaths would be misclassified. He exploited human error, procedural gaps, and the assumptions that people naturally make when confronted with misfortune. It wasn't just the deaths themselves that painted the picture, it was the details left behind. Tiny scratches on door frames, faint residues on drinking glasses, subtle bruising on wrists and forearms. Each piece of evidence individually had seemed inconsequential to earlier investigators. Together, they told a chilling story. The killer wasn't sloppy. He was meticulous, careful, and deeply patient. He refined his methods over time, learning which injuries would appear accidental, which poisons left traces invisible to routine tests, which scenarios would lead to natural conclusions. The breakthrough came when Marianne and her team reviewed the lab results from Julian Krieger's apartment. Chemicals previously dismissed in older cases were now recognized as sedatives, capable of inducing disorientation and minor accidents. When cross-referenced with the coroner reports from earlier victims, the pattern was unmistakable. Substances undetectable with older technology had been administered to prior victims, causing fatal accidents that investigators had attributed to clumsiness or age. The realization left the team both exhilarated and horrified. They had been facing a serial killer for years without knowing it. Marianne worked tirelessly, often into the night, sifting through decades of minor incident reports, hospital admittance logs, and coroner's notes. She contacted former colleagues and investigators to gather every scrap of overlooked detail. Names, dates, locations, everything had to be accounted for. Slowly, the mosaic began to form. The ghost of Beaumont was no longer an abstract presence. He had patterns, methods, and a psychological profile that could be traced. Victims fell into subtle categories. Young professionals, often single or newly moved to Beaumont, were particularly vulnerable. Their routines were predictable, their social networks small, and their interactions with strangers limited, making it easy for the killer to observe without detection. Older residents with minor physical vulnerabilities were another target, chosen for the plausibility of accidental death through falls or missteps. Even those who were cautious, Marianne realized, could not always anticipate a predator who understood human behavior so intimately. The killer's selection process seemed entirely methodical. He watched, waited, and tested limits. He observed how people reacted to small disruptions, gauged their responses to strangers, and noted habits that left them isolated at particular times. Each death was carefully orchestrated to appear natural. Forensic oversights and assumptions by local authorities played directly into his strategy. Marianne's team revisited previous accidental deaths, examining every detail through a modern lens. Coroner's notes about faint bruising, chemical residues, or inconsistent wound patterns suddenly became significant. Small inconsistencies in witness statements were revisited. How did a victim who was usually cautious fall from a staircase in such a precise way? Why did an elderly woman who gardened safely for years suddenly sustain fatal head trauma? Each question drew the investigators closer to the truth. Meanwhile, media attention began to grow. Local journalists, previously reporting on isolated accidents, began to notice the strange coincidences. Articles speculated about a possible link between the deaths. Families, once resigned to tragedy, now demanded explanations. For Marianne, the challenge was not just connecting the dots, but proving intentionality. Misclassification had erased the narrative of a killer's hand, and uncovering that narrative required both patience and ingenuity. Interviews with family and friends revealed other overlooked details. Neighbors remembered seeing strangers at odd times, delivery drivers noted unexpected visitors, and shopkeepers recalled interactions that seemed minor but now aligned with the emerging profile. Each account, previously dismissed, added a layer of understanding. Marianne realized that the ghost of Beaumont relied heavily on invisibility. He was a master of blending in, using the mundane to mask the malevolent. The killer's psychological profile Marianne developed revealed a disturbing duality. Publicly, the killer was likely respected, mundane and ordinary, someone who could navigate daily life without arousing suspicion. Privately, he exhibited traits of extreme calculation, patience, and meticulous attention to detail. He likely derived satisfaction from manipulating perceptions, from watching lives unravel while remaining unseen. His intelligence and cunning explained why his crimes had remained hidden for so long. One of the most revealing discoveries came from forensic revisitation of Evelyn Park's death. Initially recorded as a fall in her kitchen, modern analysis revealed small, precise punctures on her arms and legs. Combined with residue tests, the conclusion was clear. The fall had been induced, likely through chemical sedatives. What had appeared to be a tragic accident was in fact a calculated act of murder. This revelation forced a complete reevaluation of the earlier cases. The investigation took a new direction when Marianne noticed overlapping circles of potential suspects. While earlier cases had dismissed everyone as unrelated, the network of acquaintances, employees, and casual contacts provided a list of potential candidates. The common thread, subtle but consistent interactions with victims shortly before death. These interactions were often innocuous, offering help with groceries, assisting with a heavy object, or providing directions, but they allowed the killer to observe and position their victims precisely. Digital evidence became increasingly important. Emails, phone records, and social media interactions offered glimpses into the killer's reach. Although he was cautious, no one is perfect, and small errors left traces. One anonymous email traced back to a local IP contained details about a victim's schedule that only someone with close observation could have known. Another contained a threat phrased ambiguously enough to avoid immediate suspicion. Each piece of digital data reinforced Marianne's developing profile. The town of Beaumont grew tense. Public awareness of the ghost's presence fueled anxiety, yet also helped the investigation. Residents reported suspicious behavior, unfamiliar cars parked for long periods, and unknown individuals asking detailed questions about community routines. Marianne's team followed each lead, carefully cross-referencing reports with historical patterns. Slowly, the town itself became an extension of the investigation, its people contributing to uncovering what had once been invisible. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the investigation was the realization that the killer had learned from prior misclassifications. Each death provided him feedback: what worked, what raised suspicion, what went unnoticed. Over time, his methods became increasingly refined. Falls were staged to appear natural, chemicals were administered with precision, and minor injuries were calibrated to avoid detection. Misclassification had taught him how to avoid detection entirely. By late 2019, Marianne had assembled a database of over 20 cases, all linked by subtle patterns: minor bruising inconsistent with reported accidents, chemical traces previously undetectable, and witness accounts describing strangers and fleeting moments. With this growing body of evidence, it was clear that Beaumont had harbored a serial killer for nearly a decade, and only now was his carefully constructed camouflage beginning to unravel. The challenge now was anticipating his next move. With heightened awareness and investigative pressure, the ghost of Beaumont would be forced to adapt. Every step Marianne took, every press release, Every media report increased the risk that he might strike again or disappear altogether. For investigators, it was a delicate balance between transparency and operational security. Marianne knew the stakes. This was no longer a theoretical investigation. It was a race to prevent further loss of life. The killer had been emboldened by years of undetected crimes, but mistakes, chemical residues, digital footprints, witness recollections had created cracks in his armor. For the first time, Marianne could see a path to identifying him, to bringing him to justice, and to giving the families of past victims the truth they had long been denied. The ghost of Beaumont had thrived on misclassification and invisibility, but the threads of his deception were now unraveling. Every overlooked bruise, every subtle residue, every dismissed witness account had become a thread leading Marianne closer to a killer who had once been untouchable. The town's tranquility had been shattered, but in that upheaval, the opportunity for justice emerged. The next step would require patience, surveillance, and courage. Marianne could no longer rely on the assumption of accidents. She had to anticipate the killer's strategy, predict his patterns, and confront a mind capable of eluding detection for years. The stage was set, the pieces in motion, and Beaumont's shadows were stirring, revealing a predator who had once seemed untouchable, but was now within reach. The days that followed were tense, almost unbearable for Marianne and her team. Every lead was meticulously analyzed, every potential suspect observed. The ghost of Beaumont had remained a shadow in the community for years, but now, with patterns emerging from decades of misclassified deaths, the invisible predator was being drawn into the light. Each morning, Marianne reviewed reports with renewed urgency, witness accounts, chemical analyses, digital footprints, and forensic reconstructions. One mistake could allow the killer to vanish again, or worse, strike anew. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Marianne's team had been reviewing neighborhood surveillance footage from past years, not expecting much. Most cameras were low quality, grainy, and often misaligned. Yet a single frame captured an image of a man near a victim's residence just hours before a death that had been ruled accidental. It was subtle. A man leaning against a lamppost, seemingly waiting, inconspicuous, but when cross-referenced with local records, the face appeared repeatedly in unrelated locations linked to other misclassified deaths. The realization sent a shockwave through the team. The ghost of Beaumont was not a passing figure or a casual observer. He had moved deliberately, invisibly threading through lives, each movement measured and calculated. Marianne focused on narrowing down the suspect pool. Background checks, financial records, and social ties were scrutinized. The ghost had an ordinary facade. Neighbors described him as polite, helpful, and almost invisible in daily life. He volunteered occasionally, attended local meetings, and had no criminal record. Yet every detail reinforced what Marianne already suspected: intelligence, patience, and a remarkable understanding of human behavior had allowed him to hide in plain sight. The team devised a surveillance plan. They set up covert cameras near potential locations he might target next, monitored digital activity, and coordinated with law enforcement in surrounding towns. The aim was to observe without alerting him, to catch the predator in the act before he could disappear again. The operation required precision. Too much attention might drive him underground permanently, but too little risked losing him entirely. In late summer, the first tangible lead appeared. A delivery driver reported seeing a man matching the suspect's description carrying a package to a house on the outskirts of Beaumont. The house had been previously linked to a mysterious death that had been classified as a fatal fall. Marianne's team immediately moved in, establishing observation points. Through binoculars, they saw the suspect leave the house at night, moving cautiously, aware of potential observers. Every step was deliberate, calculated, confirming what the behavioral profile had suggested. This was a man who understood the value of invisibility. The team traced his movements using both digital and physical surveillance. Phone pings, public transit records, and interactions with service providers were compiled into a timeline. Marianne began connecting dots in real time, realizing the ghost's methodical schedule left traces even in his careful planning. Each misclassified death had been a rehearsal, a refinement of technique, and now he was acting with heightened sophistication. Yet even the most meticulous predator leaves a trace, and Marianne was determined to follow every one. The decisive moment arrived one autumn evening. Marianne's team had received an anonymous tip pointing to an abandoned warehouse near Beaumont's industrial district. It was isolated, seldom visited, and appeared abandoned, a perfect place for someone to practice the control and concealment he had mastered for years. Law enforcement units were deployed around the perimeter, and Marianne prepared herself for the confrontation. The ghost of Beaumont, the master of misclassification, would finally be apprehended. Inside the warehouse, Marianne and her team found evidence of recent activity: food containers, makeshift bedding, and a series of notebooks detailing routines, locations, and potential targets. Every page reflected meticulous planning and an unsettling calm. He had charted the lives of his victims, analyzed their vulnerabilities, and predicted the outcomes of his interventions. It was an archive of calculated malevolence, a window into a mind that had remained undetected by misclassification and procedural gaps. The ghost returned to the warehouse, unaware of the surveillance. Marianne observed from a hidden position, heart pounding but focused. When he entered, the team moved silently, surrounding the building, blocking all exits. The man paused, sensing something amiss, but it was too late. Officers converged, and the ghost of Beaumont, the master of misclassification, was finally apprehended. Interrogations revealed the full scope of his crimes. He admitted to targeting individuals whose deaths could be plausibly misclassified: falls, accidental poisonings, minor domestic accidents. He explained with chilling clarity how misclassification had been his shield, allowing him to operate without detection for nearly a decade. Each misstep by authorities, each assumption about accidents had reinforced his sense of invulnerability. The admissions were methodical, emotionless, a reflection of his calculated nature. For Marianne, the confession was both satisfying and unsettling. Justice had been achieved, yet the realization of how much human error had enabled years of undetected murders was sobering. Every coroner's oversight, every dismissed bruise, every chemical test not performed had contributed to a predator's freedom. The case would force systemic changes in forensic investigations and procedural oversight, but for those who had lost loved ones, the damage had already been done. The aftermath of the arrest rippled through Beaumont. Families of past victims, once resigned to the randomness of tragedy, finally received clarity. Each revelation, each connection drawn by Marianne's team offered closure to grief that had lingered for years. The town itself, once ordinary and peaceful, would never forget the presence of a predator who had manipulated its routines and assumptions. Residents spoke cautiously of the man who had hidden in plain sight, and a heightened awareness of vigilance became part of the community's collective consciousness. For Marianne, the investigation did not end with an arrest. She worked tirelessly with prosecutors, providing evidence, witness testimony, and digital records. The trial, covered extensively by the media, brought the ghost of Beaumont's crimes to light in excruciating detail. Each misclassified death was revisited in court, and the patterns of oversight that had allowed the killer to thrive were meticulously explained. For the public, the trial was horrifying and illuminating, a testament to human oversight and the consequences of misjudgment. The ghost of Beaumont was ultimately convicted on multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. Sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, the court recognized both the premeditation of his acts and the extraordinary patience with which he had executed them. The judgment was thorough, leaving no question about his culpability. Yet, even as the trial concluded, the case left an indelible mark on Mary Ann. She reflected on the ease with which a determined predator could exploit misclassification and procedural gaps. The lessons were stark. Vigilance, meticulous review, and the refusal to accept accidents at face value were essential. Forensic science and investigative diligence had caught up, but only because someone had refused to let decades of oversight go unchallenged. Beaumont slowly returned to its routines, but its residents carried the memory of the ghost's shadow. Parents walked their children with a wary eye, neighbors watched each other a little more closely, and the town collectively acknowledged that peace could be fragile. The ghost of Beaumont had shown them the limits of perception, the dangers of assumption, and the importance of careful scrutiny. Mary Ann, meanwhile, continued her work in criminal investigation, forever changed by the case. She published papers detailing the misclassification errors that had allowed the killer to operate, trained younger detectives in pattern recognition, and advocated for procedural reforms. The lessons of Beaumont became a model for investigations worldwide: meticulous record-keeping, cross-referencing overlooked details, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The ghost of Beaumont remained imprisoned, yet his legacy lingered in every case where misclassification might have allowed justice to slip away. Mary Ann knew the importance of vigilance, that sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who blend seamlessly into the ordinary, thriving on human assumptions and procedural oversights. His capture was a victory, but also a reminder that justice is only as strong as the attention to detail that supports it. In the end, Beaumont endured. The town's shadow had been cast long, but the light of methodical investigation, persistence, and accountability had illuminated the darkest corners. The ghost of Beaumont, once undetectable, was finally exposed. Yet the story served as a lasting warning. Some killers do not announce themselves, and some crimes thrive not on violence alone, but on the quiet missteps of a community that assumes accidents are just accidents.